Thank you so much for everyone who's on the call today. Hopefully, you're aware that the conversation that we're having today is about why your team keeps shipping the wrong thing, but also, most importantly, how to fix it. And so, without further ado, let's get started on this conversation. So to kind of like start this conversation, I want to share an example of a very public, a very massive defective launch, right? 630 million is the value of a national defective launch that occurred a few years ago. I don't know how many of you remember this, but in 2013, the US government launched a website called healthcare.gov. And essentially, as soon as the website launched, it literally, crashed on day one. And the reason why this, massive national defective launch happened is not because, the team was bad. It's not because the engineers were bad or incompetent or whatnot. It's actually because no one truly validated what they were building and at what scale they were actually building until, unfortunately, it was too late. And so the kind of like opening question that I have for you as we have this conversation around defective launches and why your team might be shipping the wrong thing is the following, right? What did your team ship recently that was a defective launch? Do you have an idea of how many defective launches you've had, how much money it actually cost you, and what you could have done to prevent it? This is kind of like what we're going to try to figure out, demystify, and answer today. And before we get started, hi, my name is Alexandra Raymond. I am a senior product manager at one of the world's biggest tech companies. So I'm also a finance professional. So I started my career doing financial planning and analysis, so FP&A. Then I practiced as a CPA for a couple of years as well before working in Silicon Valley at the startup level, and then most recently in big tech, right? So I've watched this kind of like phenomenon of like shipping the wrong thing happen from the inside on teams with smart people, big budget, but still struggling with this issue. Another fun fact about me, I'm also a fintech speaker, and one of the things that I'm deeply passionate about is the topic of inclusion as an innovation strategy and kind of like the core principle that when you build for everyone, it actually makes economic sense because by building for everyone, you actually open your market share, it makes revenue sense, and everyone's a winner at the end of the day. And during our time together, right, how am I going to frame this conversation? What are we actually going to talk about? Well, step one, we're kind of like going to dive deep on the problem, right? Really trying to understand what is the main or one of the main possibility for why your teams are shipping the wrong thing. Once we understand the problem, we will look at two insights or two possible solution to try to solve that problem and really kind of like help you guys reduce the risk of shipping the wrong thing. So that's kind of like the overview of how I'm framing today's conversation. And like I said at the beginning, I'm not keeping an eye on the chat. I'm not keeping an eye on hand raised or whatnot. However, I will do my absolute best to go through my content within the 45 minutes of allotted time so that if you have questions, we can keep this for the end of the presentation and we can have kind of like an interesting discussion from there. So let's get started. Um, Step one, what is the problem, right? Why is it that a lot of time your teams are building and shipping the wrong thing? The first thing, and I guess one of the most important things that I want to underline is that at the end of the day, it is not a people problem, right? Most founders think that, this is about your developers moving too slow, your product manager not prioritizing right, or, the backlog being a mess. And while sometimes this can, and it's most probably true, in most cases, the people are fine, right? You vetted your people, you made sure to hire, the brightest minds that you could find. And a lot of the time, the people are fine, but what is broken is the system and the process that they use to kind of like, work on those product development life cycles. So the assumption, my developers are the problem. The reality is most likely like the process that surrounds them is the actual problem. And one way that I would like to kind of like propose that we frame this problem is that at the heart of it, it is most probably a problem of misalignment, right? And there could be many reasons for misalignment and how misalignment could be the cause of why your teams are building and shipping the wrong things. And that I would like to explore and propose is the fact that everyone that's involved in building a product is optimizing for a different definition of done, right? So oftentimes kind of like the main stakeholders that are brought together when we're thinking about product building is engineer, some type of PM, and then the business, right? From an engineering standpoint, they consider that done equals the feature works technically, right? They're like, here are the technical specs. I'm delivering on these technical specs, and my job is done. We've done a good job. From a PM perspective, well, the definition of done is simply I have shipped the product, right? I've shipped what I had to ship. I'm working through my roadmap and I'm making sure that, things are seeing the light of day. So that's the definition of done from like a PM perspective. And from the business perspective, the definition of done is, you know, is this going to drive measurable results? And at the end of the day, what the business or, you as a founder truly care about is that what you are building, shipping, launches is truly contributing to your KPIs at the end of the day. And from what you can see, nobody's actually talking about the same thing when they're talking about like the fact that the job is done. And the main reason or one of the main reason why we kind of like overlook this aspect of things is that there's no process that forces alignment around the conversation before the work begins, right? It's always everyone knows what they have to do. Things are more things are moving fast. We're building, we're shipping, etc. And very rarely do we have those moments of slowing down and make sure that we're all aligned towards the same North Star. And to kind of like illustrate what I'm talking about in terms of these problems, I wanted to start by sharing a real story from the inside from one of the companies that I worked for. So recently in my career at, one of the largest tech companies in the world, I was essentially hired to join the finance team on this kind of like multi-phase launch of a payment system. The finance team had started working directly with engineers. They just needed a PM to help kind of like deliver the entire roadmap. And I got brought in when they were ready to launch the first phase. So great. I was like, I'm joining a team. I'm going to see kind of like firsthand what does a launch look like within that team. So I joined the team. They launched phase one. Phase one seems like it's going well. We close our laptops, and the following day, the tickets start coming in. And I'm sure that there's probably no one here that knows what happens, but let's skip to what was actually going on and what the tickets were all about. When we woke up the following morning, we realized that European users could not process payments because the solution that was shipped only supported transactions in USD. Now, for a global company, that is not a bug. That is like a highly defective launch if the kind of like overall ecosystem of your users is actually not able to process payments. And it's easy. And as you guys know, hindsight is always 2020, right? You're looking at this example and you're like, well, of course, Alexandra, it's a global company. How did they not think about the fact that, an internal payment processing system had to be able to support more than one currency? Well, here's what happened. So the engineers, as they were building the product, they consulted one team, which was the US finance team at the headquarters. And because this audience is Founders Bay, most of you are probably in the Bay Area or at least in the US. You might be looking at this and thinking, well, this is kind of like a common practice, right? Everyone's at HQ. We might have global operations. So usually when we make decisions, HQ is kind of like the heartbeat of the company and where everything is happening. So technically speaking, that behavior from the engineers was not completely illogical, right? They consulted the US finance team, they got the proper sign off, the they shipped phase one of the solution. However, where they kind of like dropped the ball per se was that at no point in the process, someone asked about the localization requirements. Because had they asked about, localization, who's using it beyond HQ, who's using it beyond the US team, they could have caught that, from the beginning, even prior to launching. So to bring this back to this concept of alignment of done, the engineers thought they were done because they built something that met all the technical specs. Finance and the business thought that they were done because headquarter, where most of the team was located, they knew the KPIs that they had to reach. The product makes sense, so they considered their job done. However, still with these definitions of done, nobody had asked, the rest of world segment of the users for their user feedback. Hence the defective launch and hence kind of like that reactive post-launch troubleshooting session of like having to figure out how to fix this as quickly as possible. One thing that they did get right and kind of like save them in terms of like fixing the issue is that this was a small launch and it was a phased launch, right? This was a small niche product inside a massive, robust ecosystem where thankfully downstream systems already handled multiple currencies. And so this was a fix that was, first of all, this was a fix that was relatively easy to fix because it was kind of like such a small piece of the ecosystem that was impacted. However, one of the reasons why I thought that this was kind of like relevant for this audience is that this was a small system within a bigger ecosystem, right? So when the European team kind of like realized that they couldn't process in USD using that new product that had launched, they had other internal systems that they could still use to process the payments. So as a business, as an organization, no one was really kind of like confronted with having to stop business operations. However, this is most probably not the case for startup founders and smaller scale companies where if you launch something and it's a defective launch, you're kind of like having to interrupt your operation while you're kind of like doing that race against the clock as you're trying to fix the issue that's going on. So thankfully in this example, because it was small, it was niche, it was contained, it was fixable in a considerable or kind of like record amount of time, relatively quickly. It took a few days and not months. However, I still want to point out that one thing that went wrong, which is something that I helped implement once I joined the team, is that they actually didn't do a proper UAT, right? First of all, they did not do a UAT session. And in the way that they went about asking for user feedback, they had the wrong users and used the wrong assumptions. And this is kind of like an example of what it could look like when your launch is defective and when your kind of like processes and things don't go well. Um, but what does it actually look like when you have the proper processes in place, you have proper checks and balances, and what are ways that we can kind of like use this problem statement and use this example to illustrate ways that you can implement small changes in the way that you build your product to really reduce the risk of shipping the wrong thing. And the first insight or idea that I want to share with this audience today is ship small and stay fixable. When it comes to product management or like building product, there's kind of like this old world, new world way of doing things, right? In the old world or old way, and coincidentally, in how I've personally seen it in action when I worked in the startup space, a lot of times we're thinking about product management or like building products in the following sequence where we're going to build everything, we're going to polish it, we're going to ship. And as soon as we ship, we're going to kind of like brace ourselves and get ready to troubleshoot as fast as possible and fix the bugs as fast as possible, right? It's kind of like build everything, polish, ship, brace yourself for troubleshooting, and troubleshoot as quickly as possible. Now, something that's worth flagging about this way of thinking about, shipping products is that every time you add scope before shipping, you're increasing the cost of being wrong. And one thing about, building product and like launching a lot of different features is that at the end of the day, you will be wrong about something. It's inevitable, right? And in these moments where will be wrong about something, either because you didn't ship the right thing or you didn't develop it in the right way, it actually won't be because you failed somewhere, but because it is part of, just product development, right? We have all these assumptions, but until certain features see the world, we won't know for sure that they will meet user requirement and work as efficiently as we thought that they would. And so, in opposition to this, there's kind of like the new way, the better way, or one way that I've seen it in action in big tech is the principle of shipping the thinnest version, learning from this, and then expanding. What does that look like in terms of like my personal experience? For example, I've worked in the entertainment space where we would roll out things for at the studio level or at the finance level for the studio. So instead of rolling out for the entirety of the studio, some of the decisions that we made was to divide it by genre, right? Let's roll out something for the drama slate, the comedy slate, or some of the slates that have a lower impact if we get it wrong. Learn from that smaller launch and then roll it out to the following genres. And one of the reasons why this is kind of like a better way of doing things or a different way of doing things that really reduces your probability of shipping the wrong thing is that small launches are recoverable versus it's way harder to recover from a defective launch when it is at bigger scale. So essentially, the question that you could ask yourselves within your team is, what is the thinnest version of this feature that delivers real value to one user group, right? Not a prototype, not a mock-up, but really something one user group can actually use, give you feedback, help you iterate quickly. So you identify this, you ship that, you learn, and then you kind of like go ahead and expand the rollout to the rest of your user group or to the rest of your customers. And if we take it back to that payment system example that I gave you, this is actually that the team got right. Why? This is actually something that the team got right. They launched a phased version, so something small, contained, living inside a robust system. And this is essentially why the USD only bug was a days long fix instead of a months long rebuild. So the TLDR here is really phase launch, small product, robust ecosystem. You kind of like limit the fix in one place and then you can resolve within days instead of like within weeks or whatnot. And this is truly insight one in action. And another way that I kind of like wanted to contrast a good way of applying this insight and then a way that was not so kind of like successful in applying this principle is if we compare kind of like the two examples that I gave you, right? So in the case of the payment system, it was a phased launch, it was small and contained, robust ecosystem around it. The bug was fixed within days, versus in the example of healthcare.gov, they built everything all at once. They launched everything at once. It broke in multiple direction. I mean, think about many different users across the US trying to get onto this platform and who literally couldn't until it was fixed. And this was no small split, and there was no kind of like specific small place to start working on the fix because it was a nationwide rollout. So same principle, opposite execution of the principle and wildly different outcomes. And so one thing that you can kind of like apply to your team, or what I call the Monday move, or something that you could test out right away, is you could pick the top item on your backlog and then ask your team, what is the thinnest version of this that delivers real value to one user group? And kind of like see if, something that you plan on rolling out that has kind of like this bigger scope, try to see if there's any way that you can slice and dice it in smaller increments and really to be able to like learn from that phase one launch, iterate, and then roll out the full feature. Now, shipping small and kind of like applying this principle only solves a fraction of the problem. And when I say a fraction of the problem, there are many, many, many other kind of like insights that we could dive into. But another insight that we could dive into is that you also need to know you're shipping the right thing. And this is where insight number two kind of like comes in terms of like different angles or things that we can look at to help you reduce the risk of shipping the wrong thing. So, insight number two is really about validating before you build. Um, so the rule is simple. Before any feature gets built, your team should be able to answer three questions to help kind of like reduce the fact that you might be wasting time in building and shipping something that either is not going to be used or it's not going to be usable by your customers. So, question number one is, who specifically asked for this? And I know it sounds like a silly question, but the amount of times in my career where we're working on solutions and I'm sitting in a meeting with engineers, they're showing me a product, kind of like a mock-up or like a demo of like what the feature is going to do. And at the end of the day, all I had to do was ask, who are we actually building for? Because this is a great feature, but if we're building for finance, if we're building for, I don't know, accounting versus FP&A or versus, I don't know, production finance, it's going to be like the feature is going to need to do a very different thing depending on who we're actually building for. So this is why this is one of the many questions that's really important to ask yourselves even before you start building anything, right? And when you ask yourself this question, the answer shouldn't be something as generic of like, the users want this or the market has been asking for it. And instead, the answer should be, closer or grounded in terms of like a real person with a name who said, I have this problem, right? Something along the lines of like, Sarah in our EU pilot told us on Tuesday that this is actually what she needs. And I know that some of you kind of like either on this call right now or listening to the recording might be asking yourselves, well, what if I don't actually have access, direct access to the end consumer who asked for this feature, or direct access to the end consumer who we are actually building for? Well, in this situation, what I encourage team to do is to always have some type of proxy that is going to be the voice of the customer, right? Part of my job as a finance PM is oftentimes to be that voice of the customer. Why? Well, with my years of experience in finance, I have a deep understanding of financial processes. And so when I'm sitting in these meetings with the engineering team, trying to figure out how to make the best decisions, I'm also able to be that voice of the customers because of kind of like my experience of being so close to the different pain points of what it is to be a financial analyst and what it is to have to process payment information, et cetera, et cetera. So if ideally, if you have access to direct customer feedback, great. And if you don't, if you could have some type of proxy who's really, really close to that user pain point, whom you can bring into these conversation to make sure that you're building kind of like the right product for the right person in the right way. Another question that you can ask yourself to reduce the risk of, shipping and building the wrong thing is what behavior changes if we ship this? A lot of times when we think about innovation and like building innovation or like building the next thing, it's very easy to be carried away with building a very kind of like flashy feature, fully automated, and losing kind of like the plot on who we're actually building for and what is actually going to change in their workflow or in their behavior because, or thanks to the rollout of this feature, right? So, really here what we're trying to do is we're trying to kind of like move away from what the future does, and we're trying to kind of like move closer to when we roll this feature, this is how, the user, the customer is going to interact with it. And by being able to look at it from this lens, kind of like inform how we're building the solution. So kind of like a wrong answer when you're asking yourself this question is like something along the line.
Hi Alex, I'm so sorry to break it. Do you have slides for this or is it just one screen?
No, I've been. So what do you see on your end?
Oh, so we are just seeing the first why your team keeps shipping the wrong things.
Oh, really? What is happening? So this entire time you haven't been able to see the
I
presentation. What?
was able to see before and I think then it stopped. But I didn't see again. So yeah, I believe that was it. It was like Ajay did spot it out on the chat.
Let's see here. Let's see. Let's see. Let's see here.
It would be great if the slides could be shared with everyone.
Yeah, I could do that as well. I'm just gonna start. Ba, ba, ba. Going to close this. The joy of technology, my Canva just froze, so I will open a brand new window and get right back on track. Okay, so I'm gonna close this. What is happening? Okay, so for okay, well, speaking of troubleshooting, huh? How timely. No, it's really not working for me. And then here, this rose as well. And this rose as well. What do I do? Let's see. Oh, this is great. How else? How else can I do this? Really don't know how to get it unstuck. Um, I'm so sorry. My entire laptop ecosystem just froze. Could you share the slides with Pramanya and she can uh, screen share on her end? If only my Chrome and Canva could come back to life, I could definitely do this. Let's see, let's see. I have no idea how to troubleshoot this. Um, mm, mm, mm. Can you restart fast and rejoin? Yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do. So, Pramanya, just give me a few minutes. I'm going to restart
Yeah,
my
sure.
laptop. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, take your turn.
didn't see the um, and from there, you'll see at the end of the presentation, all my information is there. So for anyone watching this who would like to have the slides, I'll gladly share them with you. Again, sorry about the technical difficulty, but yeah, just rest assured that on the very last slide, all my contact information will be there, all the QR codes on how to get connected. So just send me a note, send me an email, connect on LinkedIn, let me know that you were there, and I'll send you the deck. So, ba-ba-bam. So to minimize kind of like the risk of my poor little laptop crashing, I'm going to share the full window and not go into kind of like, full screen mode, just so that it doesn't crash. But essentially, you can see the content. And like I said, more than happy to send it to you afterwards. So, quick recap of kind of like the journey that we've been on right up until now. We started the conversation with really anchoring the problem with that example of the US government asking the question, why your team is building the wrong thing. I told you a little bit about myself. We talked about the problem and and that at the end of the day, it's not really a people problem and more so a process problem, right? I think that one of the main takeaways of the presentation so far is that the people that you have are brilliant. You've hired kind of like the best that you could find. It's really about, a process issue. And it's really about being misaligned on the definition of done. And so the goal of my presentation was to highlight that it's a misalignment problem, not a people problem, and explore different ways that you can slow down and ask yourself few questions to help kind of like make sure that everyone's on the same page. We're building the same thing. We're building for the right customer. I shared an example of how I've seen it firsthand working in big tech, where, they built this incredible feature, forgot to check with the rest of the world customers, and unfortunately had this miss where the product couldn't support USD. And I talked about what happened where, the process was very US centric, kind of like anchored with checking it with the US, with headquarters. They got sign off. They didn't do anything wrong per se in terms of the process, but where they dropped the ball was that no one made sure to ask about localization requirements. One thing that they did right is kind of like a phased approach, which kind of like saved them a lot of time on how to fix the problem. Then I kind of like went into what does the process look like when it's done right? Two insights that I wanted to share with you today: ship small, stay fixable. Again, old way, new way. The old way was build everything, polish, and kind of like brace yourself to like troubleshoot as fast as possible. Versus a different way of doing things is kind of like thinking about the smallest way that you could break down the launch, shipping that part first, and kind of like rolling out the rest of your roadmap afterwards. So we talked about the thinnest version, back to the pay, and I kind of like anchored this example back to the payment system, did a comparison of done right, done wrong in the payment system versus the healthcare gov, where in the healthcare gov example, they kind of like build this massive thing, massive scale, and when it failed, they kind of like didn't have this ability to quickly troubleshoot because of the size of the launch. And then I gave you kind of like something or a question that you can ask your team of engineering starting Monday. I called it the Monday move. And and then the second insight I wanted to share was validate before you build. And when we think about validate before you build, where we left off is kind of like those three questions that I encourage you to ask yourselves, your team, your developers, your engineers, etc. Question one: who specifically asked for this, right? Not the user, the market, or whatnot, but really trying to make sure that you have a specific user in mind that really asked for the thing. And one of the examples that I gave is that, not the example that I gave, but the tip or trick of having a proxy that is as close as possible to the problem in the room with you to help you make the decisions, right? One thing I wanted to highlight was the fact that, well, some of us have proximity to our customers or our users, and some of us don't. And when you don't, it's really helpful to at least have one person in the room with deep understanding of the users, of the user pain point, who can really speak to making sure that you're building the right product for the right person. Then question number two, where is exactly where we left off, is what behavior changes if we ship? And really, instead of focusing so much on what is the feature and what does the feature actually do, focusing on, okay, but how will the user's behavior change once this feature is launched? And I don't know if I had time to illustrate this, but there's been a lot of times where I've been in room looking at demo sessions with engineers, and the feature looked really nice, really shiny, really kind of like fancy in terms of like automation. But at the heart of it, one of my main feedback was what the finance team truly needs or what the user truly needs is for the feature to do XYZ and not for the feature to be so shiny. So really understanding that behavior change is going to be a game changer in making sure that you ship the right thing. Question three. And again, I see that we have about 10 minutes, so I'm just going to go really, really fast on the next kind of like pieces of information I wanted to share. Don't worry, send me a note. I'll send you the deck. Happy to kind of like chat about this a bit more in depth if you're interested. But so back to the question three. What's the cheapest way to test if it's truly needed before we build it, right? And the main point that I wanted to make with question three is for most startup founders, one of the most expensive thing on the P&L when we're building product is actually engineering time, right? So because engineering time is so expensive, what this question does is that it really tries to find solution before we build, before we start kind of like working on implementing this solution. So this is just a summary of the three questions. And asking yourself these three questions is also how you kind of like gain alignment with your team, right? When engineers, PMs, stakeholders all answer the same three questions before work begins, you stop having kind of like this problem of everyone thought that they were done, but as a collective, there was still, a miss or a fail because there was an alignment around what it actually means or how it actually translates to being done. And this is kind of like another, tool or tip or trick that you can use and implement within your companies to see, if you're building the right thing for the right customer. And everything that I just shared, it can sound really simple to a lot of you or to a lot of kind of like tenured, tech stakeholders. But the main question is, if it is so simple, why isn't every team kind of like already doing this, right? Why are we still having faulty launches? It's because at the heart of it, we have brilliant people, but we're working fast, we're shipping fast. And a lot of the times, what we forget is to have these moments to really make sure that we're building the right thing. And then, you ship something, it underperforms, you assume that it's a prioritization issue, a design issue, it's a marketing timing or whatnot. And then the problem stays invisible. You keep moving forward, you move on to the next thing, and the problem compounds. And there's actually a cost to shipping the wrong things, right? I think that one of the costs that nobody talks about enough when we have conversation about product management or like building and shipping the right things that every wasted sprint is money that you can't get back, and it's literally eating at your runway, right? When's the last time that you shipped something, kind of like brushed it off and then moved on to the next thing? Well, this actually had a cost and it had a direct impact on your runway. And another cost that, we don't talk about enough when we have this conversation about product management, building the right thing, etc., is investor confidence at the end of the day, right? This audience is an audience of startup founders, Maybe some of you still want to fundraise. And if you're fundraising, your investors are watching they're watching kind of like velocity hit rate. It's kind of like useless to have volume in terms of like ship things that you've been able to ship if you're not kind of like also showing that as you're building, you're being disciplined with your resources, you're building the right thing, you're launching the right thing, and you're also kind of like a good steward of this money that the investor poured into your business. There's good news, bad news. Good news, this is fixable, faster than you think. I've seen, firsthand kind of like what the difference between teams that do not implement very simple kind of like agile principles and teams that do. And the bad news, and it's so funny that we're saying this because it's impossible to share everything in 45 minutes. And it's even more impossible to share things in 45 minutes with a glitch on top of it. So in the interest of time, uh, here's how I'm going to do this. Initially, the sequence of this presentation went, it's impossible to share everything in 45 minutes. I prepared a resource that I wanted to share with this audience in exchange for some feedback on the presentation. However, unfortunately, you guys weren't able to see the presentation because, of the tech difficulty that we had today. So instead, I'm going to pivot and I'm just going to jump straight to this last slide right here. So the first QR code is the resource that I had planned on sharing with you. If you want the resource, just scan the QR code, leave feedback. I'll definitely share this with you. The second QR code is a 20-minute call with me. I know that initially the intention was to have a call if you want to dive deeper on something that we talked about today. Instead, if you scan this QR code and you book some time on my calendar, we can go over the presentation. I can send you the presentation and you can kind of like, talk about anything that's product management related that you would like to discuss. And the third QR code, if you're like, Alex, I don't want a free resource. I don't even want to hop on a call because I'm so busy. Just connect with me on LinkedIn. If you connect with me on LinkedIn and just kind of like send me a note, send me a DM and let me know that you were here, that unfortunately you weren't able to see the full presentation, I will gladly just send it over to you. No questions asked. I'll share the PDF. So yeah, thank you so much. And